Hello, welcome to Talking the Secret Doctrine. My name is Dr. Don Franklin Shepherd, and today we will be looking at the fourth sloka in the sixth stanza of the first volume of H.P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine. Once again, we will be using the verbatim edition published by Theosophical University Press, located out at Pasadena, California. Now, the reason that we have to look at this transitional sloka is because she explains in what way it is a transitional sloka in the first volume of The Secret Doctrine. Let us go ahead and read from page 151. With these verses, the fourth sloka of stanza 6 ends that portion of the stanzas which relates to the universal cosmogony after the last Mahapralaya, that is the 311 trillion year cycle, or universal destruction. Notice how the Mahapralaya is related to a universal destruction. That means that we know we're dealing with, on the one hand, the solar sun, the fourth layer of the mundane egg, going up to the seventh, and there's a layer of destruction at the seventh going into the eighth. And it relates to the universal cosmogony after the last Mahapralaya, or universal destruction, which, when it comes, sweeps out of space every differentiated things. Notice it doesn't say undifferentiated things. Gods as atoms. Well, we know that there are solar gods in the fourth layer of the mundane egg. We also know that Osiris in the fifth layer of the mundane is a god. So we know that these fourth and fifth layer beings are being wrapped up into the sixth layer, the oversoul, and in the sixth layer, protecting the Paramatman and Oyahu as he makes his journeys upwards. Like so many dry leaves. From this verse onwards, the stanzas are concerned only with our solar system in general, with the planetary chains therein, inferentially, and with the history of our globe, the fourth, and this chain especially. Now, a lot of people have gotten, I think, the underlying meaning of the secret doctrine in this passage incorrect when they point to the fact that one cannot see beyond the solar system and that these stanzas are only concerned with the solar system. One must read between the words. The solar system is a multi-layered entity. And that means that the solar sun itself possesses a spark of the divine monad. It possesses a spark of the seventh layer of Paramatman. And in our inner visions, we can be that spark. And we can journey into a solar system as that spark. And we can travel between solar systems, in a sense, as that spark. So no, simply because there is a division, and it's a huge division that H.P. Blavatsky points out early in The Secret Doctrine, between the solar suns and the central suns. That does not mean that they cannot be experienced in some way, because the solar sun possesses specks of the central sun, the great central sun in Paramatman. The active point is the third logos, and all the way on upwards. Let's go ahead and look directly at the words in the fourth sloka and understand the ideas that she is pointing out here. For he builds them in the likeness of older worlds, placing them on the imperishable centers. So he is Fohat, stretching from the seventh to the first. He builds them. Well, in this case, we're really referring to the planets in a solar system in the likeness of older worlds. That is, she's pointing out the solar suns, because the solar suns come in first into the solar system, and then the planets mirror them, the planets ape them, the planets kind of behave like the solar suns. So he builds them, Fohat builds the planets in the likeness of older worlds, older solar suns, placing them on the imperishable centers. And it's called the imperishable centers for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that we must remember H.P. Blavatsky's quote in Volume 1, page 527, that when the solar system with its solar sun is considered separate from all of what's going around it, the emperor's suns, the Raja's suns, the central point, the solar sun becomes the seventh cosmic principle. Let's take a look at that in 527 one more time. This is a key passage. We pointed it out before. If you missed it, now is the time to get it. Without this passage, the secret doctrine is very, very difficult to understand. Let's see what she said. Here's what she said. She's talking about Aditi, and she's talking about the solar sun. In the solar system, the sun is her booty, and Vahan. The Vahan, hence the sixth principle. In cosmos, all the suns are the Kamarupa of Akasha, and so is ours. It is only when regarded as an individual entity in his own kingdom that Surya, the sun, is the seventh principle of the great body of matter. And again, that's Volume 1, 527. This is the key to the secret doctrine. This is the key to esoteric philosophy. Right there in the footnote, way at the end, where you'll usually miss it. Let's go back. Make sure we understand this passage. He, Fohat, builds them, the planets, in the likeness of older wheels, worlds, solar suns, placing them on the imperishable centers, because the solar suns are now being referred to as the seventh principle. The solar sun is considered the center. Now we understand that first part of Sloka 4. Let's continue. How does Fohat build them? He collects the fiery dust. He makes balls of fire, runs through them and round them, infusing life thereinto, then sets them into motion, some one, some the other way. They are cold. He makes them hot. They are dry. He makes them moist. They shine. He fans and cools them. This acts Fohat from one twilight to the other during 7 eternities. So let's understand the second and the third part of this sloka in depth. How does Fohat build them? How does Fohat build who? The planets. He collects the fiery dust. Okay, that tells us that the planets are fiery to start with. He makes balls of fire, runs through them and around them. This is the spiral that H.P. Blavatsky talks about incessantly in Isis Unveiled, volumes 1 and 2. Infusing life thereinto. Then sets them into motion. He sets them into motion as they're coming out of that Laya center. The Laya center spins the planets into motion, a different kind of motion from what's beyond. Some one way and some the other way. Planets and their various motions, retrograde motions, etc. They're cold. Why are the planets cold? Because they're little suns to start with, imitating the older wheels, the solar suns, who are cold. The solar suns are cold, so when the planets start out imitating the solar suns, the older wheels, the planets are cold as well. He makes them hot. Well, how does he make them hot? Well, we have the solar sun and it's cold. The planets, when they come into fruition, when they stop being these little miniature solar suns, they become hot. They produce their own heat. And that's why they're hot. They're hot because they made the transition from purely mimicking an older wheel to become individual in their own right, and they become hot. They are dry. Why are the planets dry? The planets are dry because this cosmic electricity is dry. He makes them moist. How does he make them moist? Because there's now water. But the water is not the ocean. It's not the sea. It's the water in the air. So she's actually describing air here when she says moist. When she says fire, she's dealing with the first principle of sorts. When she's dealing with moistness, she's dealing with the second principle of sorts. Now what happens is that gradually that second principle of sorts, in terms of that moisture in the fiery air, ultimately temper will change, conditions will vary, and that moisture will drop and form the oceans and the seas. And then we have an interesting combination of air and water as the second and third principle from one perspective. They shine, well, the little planets are shining because they're mirroring the older wheels as the sun. He fans and cools them. So these planets shining, they stop shining. Everything is very, very hot. She's referring to something very different than from earlier. She's referring to earthly conditions, the fiery conditions in the first round. And then gradually he cools them through the second and the third and the fourth round, which we're currently in. That, I think, hopes to clarify this sloka. Let's just look a little bit further at her commentary. The worlds are built in the likeness of old wheels. We've already explained that. We know she's dealing with solar manvantaras and solar pralayas, which is why she has the following part of the sentence. Those that existed in preceding manvantaras and went into pralaya because of the law and the birth, growth, and decay of everything in cosmos, from the sun to the glowworm in the grass, is one. So she tells us, I'm talking about the sun here to the grass. It is an everlasting work of perfection with every new appearance, but the substance matter, that is Swabhavat and Paramatman, the seventh layer of the mundane egg, and forces are all one and the same. She continues a little further down in that first paragraph on 145. At present, one thing may be stated. The worlds are built neither upon, nor over, nor in the Laya centers, the 0 point being a condition, not any mathematical point. So she's made that very clear. They're not built upon, over any of the Laya centers. And the reason is because they're ultimately in a tenfold world system coming out of Mula Prakriti as the second logos. And now we're talking about that worm moving its way throughout the unknown darkness. And that's why they're not built on anything or over anything or in anything. Because one's sitting in the chair and he's looking out at Mula Prakriti, looking at the unknown darkness, and maybe the Mula Prakriti of the solar system. You see. But the solar system and the solar sun have all these principles within itself. And in that unknown darkness, there's nowhere for the central point of light to be seen yet. And so the Laya center is in that darkness, and that's why it's not built on anything so-called. Okay, let's go ahead and continue, and let's go ahead and see what she has to say further about some of these things. And since we've mentioned Mula Prakriti, let's turn to page 146. Down at the very bottom, near the very end, let's go ahead and read. Just as the owner of the carriage directs the driver from within, the higher and noumenal causes, the intelligence from whose essence radiate these states of mother, generating the countless milliards of elementals or psychic nature spirits, just as every drop of water generates its physical, intestinal infusoria. So she's mentioned the mother here. Now, it doesn't matter which mother this is. This can be Mula Prakriti as the mother, as a second logos. This can even be the third logos. This can be the female counterpart of Brahma as the third logos. It can be that mother. It doesn't matter whether this mother is the substance, is the seventh layer of the mundane egg, as Swabhava. It doesn't matter if this mother is the sixth layer of the mundane egg, as Sophia in her more pure form. It doesn't matter if this mother is Sophia Akamoth, as she drops from Sophia in her pure form into the fourth layer of the mundane egg. It doesn't matter. There's all this generation going on through all of these layers. And she writes, it is Fohat who guides the transfer of the principles from one planet to the other, from one star to another child star. And hence we know Fohat's up there at the seventh layer of the mundane egg. There's so much here. It's just magnificent when one really begins to read between the lines. So let's go on. Since we're dealing with Mula Prakriti, let's go ahead and see what she says further about it over on page 147. The occultists who do not say, if they would express themselves correctly, that matter, but only the substance or essence of matter, is indestructible and eternal, the root of all Mula Prakriti, assert that all so-called forces of nature, electricity, magnetism, light, heat, etc., far from being modes of motion of material particles, are in essence, in their ultimate constitution, the differentiated aspects of that universal motion. Please remember, in the proem of the Secret Doctrine, Mula Prakriti is universal motion. Parabrahm is spoken of as universal consciousness. There's a distinction. She's carrying it through. H.P. Blavatsky is very consistent about this in her ideas, which is discussed and explained in the first pages of this volume. See the proem. She even tells us. When thought is said to produce 7 Laya centers, it means that for formative or creative purposes, the great law, theists may call it God, doesn't matter whether this great law is seen as Oyahu, as Paramatman, 7th layer of the mundane egg, or the immaculate white disk, the first logos, theists may call it God, stops, or rather modifies its perpetual motion on 7 invisible points within the area of the manifested universe. So what are these 7 invisible points? Well, obviously, they relate to the 3rd logos, the central point, as it's going from potentiality to activity. And what's the central point doing? Why is it invisible? Because it's not broken out yet from the 2nd logos of Mula Prakriti. Remember, it's worming its way through Mula Prakriti. And maybe the idea sounded a little bit odd, having to envision this central point moving through Mula Prakriti in the darkness. Kind of odd to think of a dark ray that's moving. But that's what it is, and here's where she tells us. The great breath, remember that's the first 3 logoi, the first logos, the 2nd logos, the 3rd logos, the immaculate white disk, the dull black ground, the central point. This great breath digs through space, 7 holes into Laya to cause them to circumgyrate during Manvantara. There it is. This is such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful passage. So she's taken us back to Mula Prakriti, but she points out we can go farther. That's not the end. In Buddhism, oftentimes, Mula Prakriti was the point at which one stopped. For example, in the writings of Tsongkhapa. But there's something beyond all this. Often it is mentioned in various forms of Buddhism, whether Mahamudra or others. And here, 148, she tells us without telling us. She points to it. She's just talked about Mula Prakriti as the 2nd logos. Where do we go? Well, you notice in the 2nd paragraph on 148, this is where we can go. The primordial atom cannot be multiplied either in its pregenetic state or its primogeneity. Therefore, it is called sum total, figuratively. Of course, as that sum total is boundless. Please, nature is not a whole. This is why we can't understand it. It's figuratively a sum total. But as Arthur Schopenhauer told us very wisely in his writings, nature is not a whole. Nature has never been a whole. Nature will never be a whole. But we as human beings are trying to understand nature as though it is a whole. And it's not. And she tells us that. That which is the abyss of nothingness to the physicist who knows only the world of visible causes and effects is the boundless space of the divine plenum to the occultist. Among many other objections to the doctrine of an endless evolution and re-involution of the cosmos, a process which, according to the Brahmanical and esoteric doctrine, is without a beginning or an end. So she's talking about the immaculate white disk here. She's talking about the immaculate white disk as the primordial atom. She's talking about the central point blasting out through the Mula Prakriti, the dull black ground. And when it blasts out from Mula Prakriti, it's doing it, worming its way as a ray through the darkness. When it worms its way through the darkness, in a way it's dropping Laya centers. In a way, this is Kalahansa, the swan of time, dropping these Laya centers. And these Laya centers get dropped in the darkness and they explode out onto the scene. As they explode out into the scene, the mode of motion and the mode of consciousness both transform. The mode of consciousness of the first logos changes. The mode of consciousness of the second logos changes. And so what we have is we have an entirely new universe, the boundless in a new form, the sevenfold mundane egg. Thank you so much. I hope this gives you food for thought. We'll see you next time.